December 15, 2023, inside a Clayton County, Georgia courtroom. The air grew heavy as Judge Jules C. Scott prepared to speak. At the defense table stood Hannah Payne, only 25 years old, dressed in a prison uniform that already seemed to erase her youth. When the sentence was read, it landed with a finality that stunned the room. Life in prison with the possibility of parole, plus 13 additional years to be served consecutively. To many ears, that phrase sounds almost merciful. Possibility of parole, a chance someday at freedom. But this is where the truth begins to unravel. Under Georgia law, Hannah Payne will not even be considered for parole until she has served at least 43 years behind bars. 43 years. She will be 68 years old before the door even cracks open. The prosecutor said it bluntly, almost casually. When you look at 43 years and you are 25, all the good years are gone. Most people hear this and think, at least she is alive. At least this is not the death penalty. We are taught to believe that life imprisonment is the humane alternative, the lesser punishment. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if this sentence represents something far more devastating than we are willing to admit? Today, let me take you back to the moment that set everything in motion. May 7, 2019. A normal afternoon in Clayton County, Georgia, until it wasn't. Hannah Payne was driving when she witnessed what appeared to be a hit-and-run accident. A pickup truck had run a red light and collided with a semi-truck. The driver of that pickup was 62-year-old Kenneth Herring. The crash itself was serious, but no one was critically injured. Emergency services were already being contacted. At that point, the situation should have ended there. But Hannah Payne did not let it end. She believed she was watching a drunk driver flee the scene. She called 911 and reported what she saw. During that call, dispatchers told her not once, but twice to stop following the truck. They told her to disengage. They told her law enforcement was handling it. Hannah ignored those instructions. She later said she believed she had a responsibility to act, that she felt compelled to intervene, that she thought she was doing the right thing. She got into her Jeep and followed Kenneth Herring. She testified later that she believed a corrections officer at the scene had gestured for her to go after him, that she interpreted this as permission, that she saw herself not as a pursuer, but as a messenger for police. But no officer confirmed giving that instruction. And legally, even if they had, Hannah had no authority to act. When Herring's truck eventually stopped at an intersection, Hannah did not wait for police. She pulled in front of him, cutting off his vehicle. She exited her Jeep holding a firearm. Witnesses would later describe her demeanor as aggressive. They said she was yelling, demanding, ordering him to return to the scene of the crash. This was no longer a concerned citizen following at a distance. This was an armed confrontation. What happened next became the center of the trial. Hannah claimed that Kenneth Herring grabbed her and that the gun discharged during a struggle. She insisted her finger was not on the trigger, that the weapon went off accidentally. But eyewitness testimony contradicted her version of events. Multiple witnesses testified that Hannah threatened to shoot Herring. Not once, but twice. They said she pointed the gun at him. They said she was in control. Kenneth Herring was shot once in the abdomen while seated in his truck. He died from that single gunshot wound. Later, toxicology reports showed something critical. There were no drugs in his system. No alcohol. He was not intoxicated. Medical experts testified that he may have been experiencing diabetic shock at the time of the crash. A medical emergency, not criminal intent. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. Less than 2 hours to decide the fate of a 25-year-old woman and the legacy of a 62-year-old man. The verdict was guilty on all 8 counts. Malice murder, felony murder, aggravated assault, false imprisonment, weapons charges. The legal system moved swiftly. The case, in the eyes of many, was closed. This is where most people mentally stop. A crime occurred. A conviction followed. A sentence was handed down. Justice was served. End of story. But that assumption ignores what the sentence actually means in real human terms. 43 years before parole eligibility is not an abstract number. It is a lifetime measured in days, routines, and slow erosion. Hannah Payne was sent to Lee Arrendale State Prison, a facility that houses some of Georgia's most serious female offenders. This is not a minimum security environment. This is where violent offenders are sent, including the state's only female death row inmate. Hannah entered this prison at 25 years old. Younger than many of the guards overseeing her, her days now begin before sunrise. A loud wake-up call echoes through the dormitory at 5 in the morning. She lives in an open housing unit with hundreds of other women. There are no doors, no walls, no privacy. Every movement is visible. Every conversation is overheard. The concept of personal space disappears entirely. Breakfast is served in a crowded cafeteria. The food is basic, repetitive, and often barely edible. But refusal is not an option. Hunger is a powerful motivator. After breakfast comes work detail. Georgia does not pay inmates for labor. Hannah works every day for $0. She may be assigned to laundry, kitchen duty, janitorial work, or if fortunate, a vocational program with limited availability. This is where the punishment truly begins to take shape. Not through violence or cruelty, but through repetition. Every day mirrors the one before it. The same schedule, the same faces, the same walls. There are no weekends, no holidays, no milestones. Birthdays pass quietly. Seasons change unnoticed. Time stretches and distorts. Psychologists have a term for what happens next: institutionalization. After years in prison, people lose the ability to function independently. Decision-making becomes overwhelming. Social interaction becomes unnatural. Identity narrows until it is defined by a single word: inmate. Now imagine that process unfolding not over a few years, but over 4 decades. Hannah will spend her 30s in prison, her 40s, her 50s, her 60s, every stage of adulthood confined within the same concrete boundaries. She will never choose where to live, never decide what to eat for dinner, never determine when to sleep or wake. Every choice, no matter how small, is made for her. And this is only the beginning of what 43 years truly represents. There is another reality people rarely consider when discussing sentences like this. Prison is not designed for aging. Georgia's prison system, like many others, was built to house young and able bodies. Yet one of the fastest growing populations behind bars is women over 50. By the time Hannah Payne reaches parole eligibility, she will likely be dealing with chronic health conditions: joint pain, reduced mobility, long-term effects of inadequate medical care. In Georgia prisons, inmates are charged $5 just to see a medical provider. For someone earning nothing, $5 is not insignificant. Medications are frequently delayed. Mental health services are limited. And most facilities, including Lee Arrendale, lack air conditioning. Summers in Georgia regularly exceed 95 degrees. Imagine enduring that heat at 60 years old, in a crowded dormitory, with no escape as the years pass. Hannah will continue to lose connections to the outside world. Her mother, who nodded to her in the courtroom as she was led away, is aging. There is a real possibility she will not live to see Hannah released. Funerals will be missed. Goodbyes will remain unsaid. Friendships will fade. Studies show that most long-term inmates lose contact with nearly everyone from their previous lives within 10 years. While others build careers, families, and futures, Hannah's life remains frozen. She will not accumulate savings. She will not own property. She will not gain work experience relevant to the outside world. If she is released at 68, she will enter society elderly, penniless, and unprepared for a world transformed by decades of technological and cultural change. Some people respond to this by saying, at least she has parole. At least there is hope. But Georgia's parole system is far stricter than most people realize. For violent offenses, inmates often serve 85% or more of their sentence. Parole is not guaranteed. It can be denied repeatedly with little explanation. 43 years can easily become 50 or more. Even if parole is granted, freedom is conditional. Strict supervision, limited housing options, employment restrictions, constant monitoring. One minor violation can result in reincarceration. The sentence does not truly end at the prison gate. The psychological toll of this cannot be overstated. Long-term incarceration is associated with higher rates of depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, and suicidal ideation. Hannah cried openly during her sentencing. The prosecutor dismissed her tears as self-pity. But consider what it means to have your entire future erased in a single moment. To know that every dream you had is gone. This leads us to the uncomfortable comparison at the heart of this case. Is life imprisonment actually more merciful than the death penalty? Death row inmates often spend 10 to 20 years awaiting execution. There is an end point, finality, but Hannah faces decades of slow psychological erosion, decades of watching herself age behind bars, decades of suspended existence. Many death row inmates have said they would prefer execution to life imprisonment. Some have even abandoned their appeals, choosing an end over endless waiting. One inmate wrote that with death there is release. With life, there is only decay. This case is resurfacing in January 2026 because Hannah's supporters are pushing for an appeal. They claim her trial was unfair, that evidence was mishandled, that her attorney failed her. A website now exists raising funds and awareness. Meanwhile, Hannah remains in prison, 2 years into a sentence that will last at least 41 more. By the time she is eligible for parole, it will be the year 2066. A future none of us can truly imagine. Technology will be unrecognizable. Society transformed. Everyone she once knew will be elderly or gone, and she will step out into that world alone. This case forces us to confront difficult questions. Yes, Kenneth Herring lost his life. His family lost a brother, a grandfather, a loved one. That loss is permanent. But does destroying another life restore what was taken? Does 43 years of suffering serve justice? Or does it simply satisfy our need to punish? These are not easy questions, but they are necessary ones. Because if we are honest, life imprisonment may not be the humane alternative we believe it to be. It may be something far more severe. So after hearing all of this, do you still believe that life imprisonment is more merciful than the death penalty, or does Hannah Payne's sentence force us to confront something deeply uncomfortable about how we punish people? Comment below and tell me what you think, because this case is not simple and it refuses to stay quiet. Here is the reality. Hannah Payne will spend the next 4 decades of her life behind bars. She will watch her body age inside concrete walls while the outside world moves forward. Without her, friendships will fade, her parents will grow old and may pass away. She will miss funerals, birthdays, and ordinary moments that make life meaningful. If she is released, she will step into society as an elderly woman with no savings, no career, no stability, and no clear place to belong. She will have spent her entire adult life confined. None of this erases what happened to Kenneth Herring. His life was taken and his family lost a brother, a grandfather, a presence that can never be replaced. That loss is permanent and it deserves respect. Justice must acknowledge that pain, but we also have to ask whether creating another destroyed life actually honors it. Does 43 years of suffering restore what was lost, or does it simply multiply harm? This is why this case matters. Beyond one courtroom, we are taught that life imprisonment is the humane alternative to execution. But when a sentence quietly erases an entire lifetime, when it condemns someone to decades of isolation and psychological decay, at what point does it become something else? So I ask you again, is life imprisonment truly more merciful than death, or is it a slower, harsher punishment we have learned to accept? Let me know in the comments, and if you want to stay updated on this case and other true crime stories, make sure to subscribe, because Hannah Payne's story is far from over. She is decades ahead of her inside Lee Arrendale State Prison, and every day she will wake up knowing this is her reality for at least the next 43 years. That is what her sentence means. That is what life imprisonment looks like, and whether that represents justice or something far more complicated is a question worth considering for all of us.